Hey all, Bree from the No Guilt Mom podcast, and I have got a gift for you this holiday season. If you love the No Guilt Mom podcast, and I mean love the No Guilt Mom podcast, then tell us about it. Leave us a review, and you can be entered to win a No Guilt Mom gift card. All you have to do is leave a review, take a screenshot, and then simply go to noguiltmom.com/review to enter our giveaway for a free No Guilt Mom gift card, simply for telling us what you think about the podcast. It is amazing. But don't delay. Get right on this, as we're going to be giving away that No Guilt Mom gift card on December 21st. So get right on over and visit noguiltmom.com/review.
Welcome to the No Guilt Mom podcast. I am your host, Joanne Crone, and I am joined here by my generous co-host, Bree Tucker.
Oh, hello, everybody. Wow, generous. That's very, I love that, especially because we are recording this near Thanksgiving.
We are, yes. So it's all generous and gratitude and oh my gosh, just getting through the holidays this year is going to take a lot of gratitude and focusing on those things that we have going well in our lives, because 2020 has brought it down.
It has. And a lot of generosity needed towards everybody. Generosity with our patience, generosity with our time, generosity with our resources. There's so many things that we have to just keep going through right now.
Yeah. And being generous to ourselves as well, because we are all doing the very, very best we can. And if holiday plans aren't like what they used to be last year, that is okay. And we can tell ourselves that we do not have to put forth the entire crazy effort that we have previous years, because this year's hard. There's a lot of stress that stress can wear on you, especially as a mom.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that one thing that 2020 has taught us is to enjoy or realize that some things are very unique. 2020 is a unique year.
Yeah, and that brings us kind of into our guest today, Debbie Reber. She has written a book called Differently Wired, Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World. And it's really like at the crux of the book, it's about how this quest for good behavior, and I would say even perfection and like how your whole family acts, is more about feeling success as a parent than really doing what your family and your kids need you to do. And I think that could be tied into the holidays too, because a lot of the things we do during the holidays, and I might get some flack on this one, but it's really feeling success for ourselves.
Oh yeah, totally.
And it's not really doing what our family needs or wants per se, but it's looking at that kind of checklist. And it's like, okay, to be like a good mom during the holidays, I have to do this, 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 and this. And that's a big stressor.
Right. No, I 100% agree with that. And I do feel like when we were talking with Debbie, she points out like, hey, things can be different. Expectations can be different. Like before we spoke, it reminded me of the poem that I used to reference a lot when I worked in early intervention, was A Trip to Holland.
Yes.
Right. And I forget who wrote it at the moment. I'm blanking.
We will do that in our end.
Yeah. But yeah, it talks about expectations and how sometimes you have these grander expectations. And then once you get to that situation, the pace changes, the situation changes. You're not able to meet those expectations, and it doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing.
Yes.
It's a new and different experience, and to relish in what you have.
Yes. And Debbie talks a lot about that in our interview with her. And we refer a lot to neurodiversity when we're talking about kids. We're not putting kids in separate buckets and diagnoses. I'm a reader, not a speaker, I say, although I should work on my speaking because, hey, podcast host.
Kind of important for us to get that one down, but that's okay.
Very important to get that down.
You guys love the realness of us.
It's the realness, yes. So not putting kids in buckets, not labeling kids as autistic per se, or having ADHD, or the multitude of things that we could say, but referring to everybody as neurodiverse. So we talk a lot about that in this episode, as well as how you can feel success as a parent if maybe like your family situation isn't what you expected it to be.
Right. Because all of that is something to be embraced and loved. And chances are all of us have got a little something a little different, a little differently wired.
Yes, it is definitely like we're all neurodiverse. So Debbie is a parenting activist, speaker, founder of Tilt Parenting, host of the Tilt Parenting podcast.
Wonderful podcast.
Wonderful. And author of more than a dozen books, including her most recent, Differently Wired, Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World. We hope that you enjoy our conversation with Debbie. How hard was it when your kids were under 5?
Oh, so hard. I mean, Robert didn't even sleep for the first 3 years.
I'm totally with you there because my son didn't sleep for the first 3 years of his life. And many times I felt so alone and I had no idea what to do or what to try. And I wish this Parenting in Place Masterclass series was around then, especially with this week's topic. This week, Tina Payne Bryson, author of Bottom Line for Baby and multiple New York Times bestsellers, including The Whole Brain Child, and Mona Delahook, author of Beyond Behaviors, will be talking about all things young children. Relationships, tantrums, communication, reflecting on our own stress. And if you aren't signed up for the Parenting in Place Masterclass series yet, what are you waiting for? This series comes from a group of parenting experts, therapists, authors, educators, and neuroscientists, some who've already appeared on this very podcast, like Tina in episode 24. And they've all come together to share their very best strategies and ideas for how you and your family can thrive this fall. The best thing is that whenever you sign up, you get access to all past sessions. And let me tell you, the ones so far have been fantastic. Visit our link in the show notes to sign up for Parenting in Place. Let's start the show. You want mom life to be easier. That's our goal too. Our mission is to raise more self-sufficient and independent kids, and we're going to have fun doing it. We're going to help you delegate and step back. Each episode will tackle strategies for positive discipline, making our kids more responsible and making our lives better in the process. Welcome to the No Guilt Mom Podcast. Hi, Debbie. We are so happy to have you on the No Guilt Mom podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, as I was researching you, we have kind of a common background. Like you used to work in TV. I used to work in TV too. So I was like, oh my gosh, like someone who went from the TV world to kind of the education world.
Yes. It's funny. One of my TV jobs was Cartoon Network, and that was the only one that wasn't non-educational, really. And when I was there, I was like, this is not a fit for me. I need to be working on stuff that has kind of a social educational value to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was working in reality TV, which did not have a social educational value whatsoever. And I totally flipped my script and went back to school and went to become a teacher because I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this anymore.
Oh, that's so cool.
Tell us a little bit about what you do now and a little bit about your work currently.
Well, right now, actually for the past almost 5 years, I've been working on a project called Tilt Parenting. So after I left the TV world, I wrote books for teenage girls. I spent 15 years doing kind of self-esteem building work for teens. And then I did this big pivot when I discovered that I was raising a child who was neurologically atypical and really just floundering to make my way and get resources and just navigate this path, which was really unclear. And so I decided once I kind of got through, I'm still in it to be clear, but once I got through kind of the more challenging years when he was younger, I really just felt this strong drive to create something for other parents like me. So right now I have a big community. I have a podcast. I'm an author, so I've written a book about this, and just very involved in supporting parents who are raising kids who are differently wired in any way, feel like they're part of something, and have access to the information that would be most helpful to them.
I think that's so important, that connection. I mean, anyone that's been through a difficult situation where you kind of had that gut feeling that something's off, but you can't really put your finger on what it is. You need other people to be able to connect with that, understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, 100%.
We're hitting that time of year where my brain gets so overloaded in December that I look for anything to make life easier. And I have to say, Brie, that Green Chef is one of those services.
Yes, Green Chef is there to take away the dreaded, oh my goodness, what are we going to eat for dinner tonight? You can eat clean all holiday long with over 80 weekly meal options each week, featuring things like quick and easy, protein-packed, calorie-smart, or my personal favorite, the keto options.
And you don't have to lose track of healthy eating habits during the holidays because every Green Chef customer gets a free session with one of their registered dietitians who can walk you through how to make clean eating work for you, which is very cool.
And I have to say that I have been loving their recipes lately. They put things together I have never thought of. This week, we're trying the lemon basil caper pork with sauteed cauliflower, bell peppers, almonds, and feta cheese, my favorite. Their recipes make it so easy to support my wellness goals without skipping on flavor.
For Green Chef's best deal of the year, get $250 off with code NGM250 at greenchef.com/NGM250. That's greenchef.com/NGM250. And don't forget to use that code NGM250 to get $250 off.
Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Hey, Aubrey here, and I wanted to share one of my favorite gifts to give during the holiday season, a Storyworth book. It is the most amazing gift ever. Storyworth is an online service that lets you create a special and unique gift of someone's story. I've given Storyworth books to both of my parents, and it has been their favorite gift, hands down. And did I mention it is so easy? Storyworth emailed my parents questions every week that I handpicked from their massive list of questions that they have. All my parents had to do was open their email and answer them. That easy. I asked my dad questions like, did you have any rules that you set for yourself as a parent, which you immediately broke? And he did. I even asked both of my parents, are you more like your mom or your dad? And they shared a lot of really amazing qualities that I didn't know about my grandparents at the time. Then at the end of the year, Storyworth compiles all of their answers, puts them into this gorgeous book that covers everything. My parents love showing us their books, and I personally love getting a chance to read them. With Storyworth, I am giving those I love a thoughtful and personal gift from the heart that preserves their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/NGM and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/NGM to save $10 on your first purchase.
As I was reading your book, Differently Wired, like it was one of those books that I'm like, man, I wish I would have read this as a teacher, because you really like open up how like neurodiverse the world is and how we need that. Can you talk a little bit about like how you kind of define neurodiversity and what you would consider included in that?
Yeah, and I'll just say that the term neurodiversity really stemmed from the autism community and from autistic people themselves, kind of saying that, hey, there are different ways for the brain to be wired. There isn't one right way and one wrong way. And so the neurodiversity movement really started there. And then I started using this language of differently wired, and I use it interchangeably with neurodivergent as well. But I really love the idea of recognizing that, yeah, there isn't one way to be. No one is normal. And in fact, when you look at all of the different ways that people can be wired, including things like ADHD or learning disabilities like dyslexia or dysgraphia, or someone with anxiety, someone on the spectrum, someone with sensory issues, someone who's gifted. Giftedness is a way of being differently wired. And so when you look at all of those differences and things we don't even have labels for, you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, why are we all trying to fit everyone into this one little, bucket container, or striving to be normal, when really there is such variance in the way our brains are wired, and all of those variations come with incredible gifts and strengths. And so that's a big mission of mine, is to foster more just understanding for the fact that normal doesn't really exist, but the way that we are educating our kids and kind of pushing forward in society doesn't necessarily meet the needs of kids who don't fit into that bucket. And we're losing a lot of gifts because of that.
Yeah, I think I love that perspective on it, because as a teacher, I frequently had kids come through my classroom who were differently wired and who had these diagnoses. And when you look at them all in these separate buckets, it's really hard to figure out how to best help or how to best teach kids who have these different needs. And seeing it all grouped together and seeing how no one is normal brings such like an understanding to it.
Yeah.
We all have our quirks.
All
do,
quirks.
man.
All have our quirks. And I was wondering, like, how can we help our kids really become like more inclusive of kids who are neurally diverse or differently wired? Because what I see is like those kids are kind of shunned on the playground because kids, like other kids, don't understand them. They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to behave. The neurotypical kids, not the neurodiverse kids, with not knowing how to behave towards them. So like, how can we help our kids be more inclusive of those who are differently wired?
I think it's part of this bigger paradigm shift of the way that we perceive difference in the world. And there's a lot of stigma attached to labels like ADHD and misunderstandings. There's myths about these things. And so one of the things that we do is if we're not raising these differently wired kids, is we kind of buy into the stigma. We perceive it as something other, right? Those are outliers. And we may not kind of challenge our own biases that we have against people who are differently wired or all of these different labels. And it's really important, I think, with kids especially, that we just have open conversations. We normalize all of this. This is why, the early education piece, I think, is so important, and preschoolers in particular. We know that little kids recognize difference, they notice difference, but they don't assign a value to it. And so if we can start with kids when they're young and helping them not judge like, oh, that's bad behavior, so-and-so is bad, but so-and-so actually, because of the way their brain is wired, sitting crisscross applesauce is really difficult for them because their brain is sending signals that they need to move to concentrate. Isn't that interesting? Right? So I think there are ways that we can really raise kids so they grow up being allies and really understanding the needs of other kids as opposed to otherizing them or shaming them. And that's a top-down culture thing. The classroom culture, depending on the teacher, can really set a tone for this is a bad kid, this is a kid who's misbehaving, versus this is a kid who has unique needs. So there's a lot of pieces to it, but I think having more open conversations, if you're raising a neurotypical kid and they come home and say, oh my gosh, you should have seen what, Jenny did on the playgrounds or something today. It was so obnoxious. Instead of being like, yeah, wow, that sounds really obnoxious, be like, I wonder what is going on with them. It sounds like she was struggling with something. Maybe we could get curious about that. So there's conversations and understanding. And what we find is that when kids grow up with a better understanding of what's happening, then they are going to be more invested in helping that kid thrive as opposed to excluding them.
You bring up such a good point, because I've had instances as a parent where my kids have come home and been like, oh my gosh, like so-and-so made us lose recess, or so-and-so, there was one in particular, my son was in first grade, and he said this one boy was flipping the middle finger at everyone during class, which the teacher is obviously labeled as a bad behavior. But looking more into this whole, the neurodiversity, and I have to say, as a teacher, I didn't know as much about this as I wish I would have. Mm-hmm. But just recognizing that different kids have different needs, and it doesn't make them a bad kid. And it's impulse control too. Different kids can do different things at a time.
Right. And you were saying too, I think the other day when we were talking, that with your formal education as teachers, there really isn't much support that they give you in terms of what to do with special needs.
They don't.
And my background, my background is both in special needs as well as early childhood. And I've even been a district coordinator for preschools for a school district. Mm-hmm. And it was just amazing how much groundwork you have to lay to talk to people about all these different situations that children can be in and all the different special needs that they may have, that you just talk about everything from like, hey, it might be like a little bit of sensory going on there.
Mhm.
And then how that has to, like you were just talking about, how this has to go not only with the teacher, but then with the students and having that open conversation. And then you also have to reach out to try to let the parents know as well. Like, hey, this isn't necessarily a bad behavior. It's just a child that needs to adjust to something in a different way.
I will say that, I think I just remember when my son was little, like he would get really emotionally dysregulated because he was being triggered constantly because of the unpredictability or the demands placed on him, or the way he inherently showed up in first grade was not considered compliant because he had his own agenda, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't have the skills. And so now when we reflect back, I just think, and talk with him about this, like you were a little human whose needs were not being met. Like you didn't have the skills. And so it really involves a big reframing of that all behavior is communication. We know that kids want to be happy. Kids want to thrive. They're not choosing to be sent out to the principal's office or anything like that, but they don't have the skills to do anything different in that moment.
They want to connect. They just, like you just said, they don't have the skill set to be able to do that. So talking about that, I was listening to your podcast recently, and on your last podcast, there was a sub discussion about coping mechanisms. And you reflected back about how you would take your son to summer day camp, and that he always had books in his bag, and that you would tell the counselors like, okay, well, if he has a rough time, he has a book in his bag, just pull it out, let him read it. And you didn't realize at the time that was a coping mechanism of his, which, by the way, my heart was like, got so big because that's my son too. He's, whenever he gets a little too much, he gets involved in those books, and that's what helps bring him down and regulate him. So with this all being said, how do you think that we could help parents be able to identify those coping mechanisms that their children have?
I think we want to observe them, right? We want to see, how they are self-soothing, and we can notice that it could be like a lot of kids, especially if they're in fight or flight, they might want to put on really cozy pajamas or get in bed or have a snuggle, just kind of notice what they're gravitating towards. I knew that, from a very early age that Asher could lose himself in books. And so that to me was just like logical. Well, if he's upset, just give him this, right? I didn't make that connection that that's how he centered himself and re-regulated himself and calmed down his own anxiety, because I didn't actually even recognize that it was anxiety back then. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I just thought, this is hard behavior. Here's what you can do to fix it. And so, I think we just want to really be curious, and as our kids get older, we can also talk with them about, what might work, or give some suggestions and try different things out and see what actually feels good. But, it can be a lot of these kids, it is the coziness, putting on slippers, having some tea. A lot of people make a little nook for their kids so they can feel really secure and cozy. A lot of these kids like to be cozy.
Yeah. I think that's a big one for sure.
Yeah. Flipping to like the parent side of it, I read recently when you said that when Asher was younger, that the quest for good behavior was more about feeling success as a parent than meeting your child where he was. Like, what suggestions do you have for parents about meeting kids where they are?
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. It is so hard to raise kids who know how to manage money. Bree, right now, my kids are all about earning money for presents. My daughter wants to get presents for all of her friends, and my son is doing a Secret Santa with his friends.
Oh, I hear you. And if you're looking to raise kids that are financially responsible, we have got a lifesaver recommendation for you that you need to check out. It is Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app made for families that gives kids and teens an easy and fun way to gain financial literacy, all while giving parents peace of mind.
You can send instant money transfers, automate allowance, and even keep an eye on kids' spending with real-time notifications. Meanwhile, your kids can begin their journey towards financial autonomy by learning how to save, invest, and spend wisely.
So sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/NGM.
That's greenlight.com/NGM to try Greenlight for free. Greenlight.com/NGM. My son is playing a game right now on his computer where he's a thief and the cops are after him. So I'm so excited about this new app, Give As We Grow, where instead of being the quote unquote bad guys, kids are practicing giving back.
That is so cool, Joanne. I really wish that there was something like this when my kids were younger that got them excited about giving back to others and helped them build a better understanding of what it really means to volunteer.
Give As We Grow is the first of its kind free educational mobile app for children ages 8 to 11 that teaches kids via fun, service-focused minigame quests to tap into their unique talents and interests to help others.
And did you know that studies show that there is a biological connection between generosity and happiness, and that volunteering improves people's physical and mental health? I mean, kids who volunteer typically do better in school and are less likely to engage in risky behaviors. And that is something that I think we all want for our kids.
Ready to spark a new movement in generosity? Find and download Give As We Grow for free in the App Store for Android and iOS. And for resources for the whole family, visit giveaswegrow.org.
I think we have to really get to know our intention and why behind the things we're trying to correct. You know, I think we often go into our lives as parents with this, we haven't really considered, we just have this idea of what a well-behaved child looks like, what we want that dynamic to feel like. And, you know, we imagine this really respectful relationship where our kids listen to us and are compliant. I mean, at least I did, because I knew I was going to rock it as a mom.
Oh, yeah.
We all do. We all think we're going to rock it.
I think, okay, wait. And I'm just going to say, like, any of us that have that background in education, I think we all had that unearned sense of like, oh, I got this.
We're like done.
Totally. I'm an expert in this. Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think, but we have to start to recognize where, oh, actually, like I'm coming up against this child who is not the child I thought I was going to be raising. And I need to start really questioning those things. And but, you know, I think of Alfie Kohn's work. I don't know if you've read his book, Unconditional Parenting. So that book was so impactful for me when I read it, because it made me start looking at all the things I was prioritizing as compliant or good behavior. And I started asking, why does this even matter? Why do I care if my 8-year-old with ADHD wants to stand at the dinner table while he's excitedly talking? I don't care. Stand.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's not a deal breaker. And when you start taking off some of those things, but so much of it, right, is based on societal expectations. And if we're in public, and so you really have to tease apart, am I doing this to save face? Am I doing this to look a certain way to other people? And then start to question, is this actually what's best for who my child actually is?
That's hard, because you do feel like you're being judged in public if your child is acting a certain way. And I feel like a lot of my actions as a parent are influenced by public opinion if they're out, and it's incredibly difficult. And I remember reading somewhere that you said, like, once you learn to let go, it became a lot easier. How did you really go about letting go? Because I feel like, and you're laughing,
I feel like that definitely had to be a journey.
It had to be a journey.
Yes.
I would love to let go.
It was definitely not a switch that I flipped. I will tell you that.
I wish it was.
Yeah, painful lesson I learned over and over and over again. I mean, first was just becoming aware of the fact that I was really attached to people's perception of who I was. Like, I had to really reconcile with that and consider, like, why? Like, why is that matter to me? And sometimes that means going back to your childhood and, you know, uncovering stuff that's deeply buried that we don't want to even examine, but it's worth doing that work. And then it just becomes a matter of starting to notice, like, when is this happening? And the more we're conscious of it, that this is a default mode for me, the more when it happens in the moment, we're going to get that like hit in our body, like, oh crap, I just did that again. And then we're going to repair with our child. We're going to let them know, gosh, I really made a decision back there that if I had a do-over, I would have handled that much differently. I'm really sorry. That wasn't respectful. And I'm working really hard to do differently next time. And so the more we go through that, the more we have lots of opportunities to practice, right? The stronger that muscle will be, and it will become easier and easier. But it's a long, lengthy process.
And you know what I love that you just said, like talking about how and I would assume this conversation occurs with your child sometimes, like, yeah, I really wish I would have handled that differently. Letting them know that, especially because sometimes there are those situations where you handle something that happens with your child one way, and you realize that it really wasn't being respectful to your child, meeting them where they're at. You say, like, I'm sorry, I wish I could have done that differently. Next time I'm going to try to do this. I feel like that just really helps strengthen that connection with your child, and letting them know that mom isn't just saying that she loves you unconditionally. Mom means she loves you unconditionally. And we all make mistakes, and we're all going to be able to learn from them and move forward. And I don't know, just family loves you no matter what. We're still going to be able to make it. Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah. So I have to say, like, when reading your work, like I felt emotionally like guilty as a former teacher of seeing kids. Like I could pick out the kids that I taught in my classroom
back to you in your mind,
who were probably like differently wired, and the kids who had like always like the only action I had for them was to send them to the principal's office because it was creating a distraction in class. Like I had no other means of kind of helping them and serving their needs. So now I'm thinking, like, as parents who are teachers, as parents who are like scout leaders or leaders in their church, what are some things that they can do if they have a differently wired child in their group that they are teaching?
Yeah, I think, you talked about connection and relationship. I think that's the most important thing that we can do, is to really actively work to forge a relationship with this child that's rooted in respect. That is everything. If a child feels seen and for who they are, they're going to let down their defenses. And that's actually when true learning can happen. When they're more accessible, their social emotional life is more accessible, then we can actually sit down and say, hey, this has been happening, and I know it's really tricky in this scenario. Like it's causing stress for me, and I know it can't feel good for you. What could we come up with together? So I'm a really big fan of Dr. Ross Green's collaborative proactive solutions. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He wrote this amazing book called The Explosive Child, which saved my life when my guy was little. But it's really all about, he's the one who talks about these lagging skills and that kids do well when they can. So if we go into a relationship with a child with that, strong conviction that this child would do better if he or she could, then we can see our role as being building a relationship with them and working with them to come up with creative ideas. So that way, not only can we ultimately address the challenging behaviors, but that child is learning skills, they're building confidence. It's just a win-win all around. But I think so often, because we are stressed about management of a classroom, we sometimes behavior is just so disruptive. You have to, deal with it in that moment. So it's a really challenging to do. I have so much respect for teachers who have intense kids in their classrooms and don't have tools or the time or the resources to really support that child's growth. But the more we can invest in relationship with them, that's really where it starts.
I love that. I love the investment in the relationship and then working together with the kid to figure out a possible solution and what to try next. I've definitely seen that working when I was a teacher in the classroom and also when I was running a Girl Scout troop. And what else can like adults do to help kids feel more included in the group? Not just to like help their behavior and help them, give them the skills to react like appropriately in a group setting, but what about the other group members?
Yeah, I think the adults need to remember the power they have to set the tone for the culture of any group. And so kids will follow their lead. And so as a teacher, if you just are really, or a leader, a group leader, a coach, just really aware of the language that you use and the way that you're modeling understanding, kids are going to follow your lead. Again, building that relationship, being proactive if you see other kids who are bullying or who are not treating their neurodivergent peers with respect or they're misinterpreting their behaviors. Like trying to catch those things early and facilitating conversations with those kids. And also, I think sometimes having conversations with parents of neurotypical kids too, so they are aware what's going on. And there can be some privacy issues here, but if you get the parents' permission of the atypical kid, then sometimes like that coach or that teacher can do so much good in helping other parents understand this is what's going on. So they're not just hearing stuff from their kids, but they're actually understanding, in a more holistic way what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of one instance in particular where that was an issue, and where the parent of the differently wired child, like, she knew there was some kind of issue, but she didn't know what the issue was. And it was focused more on behavior rather than like something about differently wired. And I think language is so important. So when addressing a group of kids, what do you say when you have a child who may be acting out in class and basically these behaviors I've seen are like talking really out of turn or getting so mad like the desk goes across the room. How do you talk to kids? Like, what language do you use talking about that?
I think you talk about, depending on the age of the kids, although even really young ones can be interested in brain science, right? We can talk about brain wiring, and that's everyone's brain is different. And we can bring in examples that every kid would relate to. Like, you remember how it feels when this happens. This is what this child is feeling. Sometimes their nervous system is wired in such a way that they might feel like they've run into a bear in the middle of the path, when really it's, so we can find ways to relate. But if I think talking about the brain science, that isn't it interesting, right? How some people's brains, in order for them to feel calm, they actually need to spin around. That is so, what do you do to feel calm? So helping kids kind of identify themselves and understand also that we're all working on things. So I think it can be really helpful for the leader, the teacher, to model areas of their own lagging skills, things that they're working on, and helping all kids identify things that they're working on. Or maybe, oh yeah, my brother does this, and I find, that I really need this. And so it becomes more how we can all look at the way that our brains are wired. Everyone has strengths, everyone has weaknesses. And doing it from that curiosity, even being like a social detective, right? Like, I wonder what's going on in their brain,
Yeah. I like that, the social detective part and figuring that out, because all of us have those little quirks. And I'm sure like many listeners listening right now can think of people in their lives who are probably differently wired and react in those ways. And I love how in your TEDx talk, you talked about how companies actually need neurally diverse people to solve the problems. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I am a huge believer that the kids that we would label as disruptive today in classrooms all over the world are the industry disruptors that we celebrate as adults. So they're the innovators. They're the creative problem solvers because they are unconventional. They push back on things. They look at problems differently. And so many businesses are starting to recognize this. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, 60 Minutes did a special on companies that are actively recruiting autistic employees. And it's companies like Microsoft and Ernst & Young and really big companies who are recognizing that their autistic employees that they're recruiting, have a really good eye for detail. They can hyper focus on things. They can look at a lot of data and pick out inconsistencies. Like, it's got all these strengths. And so what's really cool is a lot of these companies are also modifying their interview process, so that these autistic applicants can feel more confident now everything's over Zoom, but even before COVID, they would do them over Zoom or they would find different ways to assess a candidate's strengths that is more in their zone of comfort and competency, as opposed to this is the way we do it and you have to fit into this system. Right. So even adapting a workplace environment, again, we're all virtual now, but those kind of those big rooms where everyone's in cubicles, but it's an open workspace. That is really challenging for people with sensory issues and all kinds of things. So companies are starting to get more savvy and thoughtful about how can we support our atypical employees.
When you said the interview process is geared towards more neurotypical people, and it totally like negates the people who might have these different skills to bring companies to a bigger level, I was like, yes, because you said like eye contact is usually judged in an interview, and like how you hold yourself and all of these things. I think it gives so much hope to parents whose kids are now called the disruptors. Their kids really have these gifts that are going underappreciated by our society. And they have a lot of amazing, amazing qualities that are just underutilized.
And that's why it's critical that we ensure they grow up feeling safe enough to realize those gifts, because kids who are told repeatedly over the course of their education that they're the bad kid, they're screwing up, they're broken, they need to adapt who they are to fit in, they are going to lose confidence, and those strengths aren't going to be developed. And we need them, because if you look at the kind of biggest problem solvers of the last couple centuries, they're all people who would be considered differently wired.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, just off the top of your head, I would think
Albert Einstein
for sure.
Yes.
Elon Musk, certainly differently wired. Bill Gates, differently wired. Like
they're all
innovators.
Not that every kid's going to turn out to be the next Elon Musk,
but
there's
we
hope.
Need
what they've got.
Right.
They need to keep that confidence too. You're right. Because if they don't have the confidence, they will never put themselves out there or challenge themselves in ways that will let those gifts come out and to shine.
Yeah.
Oh my, like I have so much I'm thinking about like personal relatives of mine that I cannot share on the podcast, but like this is just groundbreaking, kind of talking about this in public and bringing everybody together, because I go back to my teaching all the time. There are kids there who I knew as a teacher what their gifts were. Like I could see their brilliance. And I also saw that they did not fit in the school system, and the school system was not serving them to help them grow. Like when you said in the book that your son Asher said, school is killing my dreams. I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Right.
Oh gosh. It's painful. And he was like in first or second grade when he said that. And this is a kid who loves to learn. And that was pretty crushing. Yeah.
And how old is he now?
16.
16. And are you still homeschooling?
No. So we homeschooled for 6 years, and it was amazing. I mean, the first year was a little rocky, but it got better and better with each year. And it was just wonderful because he really got to learn the way he learns and build that confidence. And it was incredible. And I loved actually having that time with him. And we kind of we always said, hey man, if this stops working, we'll look at other possibilities. And so towards the end of 8th grade, we were both kind of like, I think it's time to try going back to school. So he's now in his second year back in high school.
Awesome. And like as a mom, and what you've described about like trying to find the best thing for your child and all of the tests and all of the schooling options and the homeschooling, I imagine like that must have been first incredibly overwhelming and feeling alone. And so like during that time and even now, like how do you keep yourself from feeling that overwhelm and from like doing things also for you as well as your child?
Well, I get help. First of all, I mean, I'm a big fan of therapy or parent coaching or whatever you can get. Joining support groups, joining a community on Facebook of parents like you, just so you feel like, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. And there are people who have been right where I am, and things get better. Because when we have kids who are little, like, most parents, those ages between like 6 and 10, early elementary school, those
That's
are
hard.
really, I think, the toughest years for these kids because they're just they're in school and school isn't designed for them and they don't have the development or the maturity yet to kind of take those therapies or whatever else and have it kind of work together to support them. So I would say getting help was one of the most important things that I did. And I did work with a parent coach back then. And I still reach out to her when I'm going through a rough patch now. So that is really huge. And I'm also a huge proponent of self-care. It is non-negotiable. I've always been this way, but even more so now with COVID too. But, for me, it is just something that has to happen or I cannot show up the way I intend to show up for my child. So I'm pretty adamant that it happens every day, whatever it looks like. If that means I have to get up super early to go for a walk or just talking with someone on the phone or listening to a podcast while I cook, like it can look many different ways, but I have to do something that is just feeding my soul. And I'm selfish about it. Like it's like going to happen.
That and the ways that you mentioned it, there are such simple things that you could do, that things that do feed your soul, and knowing that. What are you working on now that you're really excited about?
I have so many projects. It's like, gosh, I can't stop making projects.
I have that problem. I know what that is.
I mean, it's great. And it's like, sometimes I just want to go to a cafe and read a book. Like anyway. So right now I'm really early on in, I am working on developing, a show for preschoolers. I used to work in preschool TV. So that's kind of a passion of mine. And so along the lines of what we were talking about before, I'm again, super early in development, but just thinking about how can we create a show that, that has this message of building allyship and true understanding on a peer level.
That's awesome.
And then I'm just starting, I've written a bunch of books in my day, and Differently Wired took a lot out of me. And my agent has been like, when's the new book? And I was like, I don't know about that, but I've started a new document for the new book project. So I'm starting to kind of figure out what that's going to be. So.
Awesome. And tell us where we can find you and your podcast and everything.
So the best place to reach me is through tiltparenting.com. And that is where you can find all 230 plus episodes of my podcast. You can search by homeschooling, learning disabilities, parent experts, whatever. There are a lot of resources on there. I have a Tilt education section where I've crowdsourced a listing of schools that are friendly to differently wired kids. So over 200 schools in that database. All over the world, actually. So tiltparenting.com, at that handle on all the social. And I do have a Facebook community that's called Tilt Together. And that is a group where I do Facebook Lives. And that's really parents supporting other parents and getting the resources that they need. Like, I need a OT in Durham. Where do I go? And people will jump in and support.
That's great.
That's amazing to have that source of support for parents.
Yeah.
Anything that helps parents feel less alone and get them the help they need. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Debbie. It has been a pleasure talking to you. And I feel like we have learned so much and can take away so many strategies now to help kids feel more included in groups, and also to talk to our kids about how to be more empathetic to others who are differently wired. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So our conversation with Debbie, it was so interesting because in this 2020 world, Debbie was coming to us from her sister's craft room.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like it did the epitome of figuring out how to do things on the fly, because that wasn't what she was planning on. Like when we scheduled the podcast, things weren't expected to be that way, but they were taking a turn. And she was like, I think I'm gonna have to go to my sister's this weekend. And then it was, I have this podcast, so we're going to do it in the craft room. And you know what? We roll with it.
We roll with it. And it was excellent. It was excellent. And what I loved about Debbie is that it's looking to see how to help parents identify these ways that they can come together as a community and share their experiences.
I love when in talking to Debbie, the one thing I definitely walked away with was that she understands and saw the need for a community of parents. And I feel like that's huge, just huge. And it's something that we all need. With No Guilt Mom, like we focus on that too.
Yeah.
Try and help us all find that community because you need other parents. You need that village.
I feel like you can really deal with so much more when you have that community of support around you. Like
right.
when you feel lonely and like nobody else is going through what you're going through.
Right.
That is the biggest stressor, I think, of all.
And you know, it's even, I think it's a big factor too when, let's bring this very specifically back to your child. When you can feel that there is something that isn't quite checking those boxes, that there's something a little different, it can make you feel like you're losing your mind when there's nobody that can help say, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And when you're trying to explain it to doctors or friends or family or even your spouse, it can be so, it can amplify, like you just said, those feelings of loneliness or helplessness.
And even teachers, like in the classroom, when I was a classroom teacher, and I mean, it's about 7 years now that I've been out, but when I was there, we didn't really pay attention to this neurodiversity in kids. It was kind of a one size fits all discipline approach. I mean, I was one of those teachers. I had the behavior chart in my classroom where the clothespins moved up. And obviously, like looking back, I would take that out immediately. But you don't have that discussion going on. You don't have those options. And when we talk about neurodiversity and we see, hey, every kid responds to things differently, it really has to be tailor-made for the child.
Right. And you didn't really have those resources either going through school.
No.
It's a very,
we had one class on exceptional children, just one class. And I feel like I was shorted as a teacher, and all of my students were like shorted as well because I had no clue whatsoever what I was doing when it came to dealing with kids who were neurodiverse.
Right. Because I mean, how many classes did you take in college on that? How many classes did they offer for you as a teacher?
Just one.
Just one. Right?
Just one. And like, it's such a service that Debbie is doing for parents to help them feel less alone in her Tilt parenting community and through her podcast. So we encourage you to go check out Debbie Reber and Tilt Parenting. You will feel less alone and
you'll find your community.
So with that, hey, if you enjoy our episodes, can you hit that subscribe button and we will appear on your podcast app every Tuesday and Thursday. You'll get a No Guilt Mom podcast episode. And while you're subscribing, if you would take the time to rate and review our podcast, we would be so appreciative. It helps other moms find our podcast. Apple Podcast shows it to more people when we get the reviews. So it would give you big virtual hugs for that.
Yes. Come on, we're a fun couple gals. I know everybody loves hanging out with us.
Yes. So until next time, remember, the best mom is a happy mom. Take care of you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for stopping by.
Are you looking for something to listen to with your whole family? Then check out 6 Minutes, produced and created by Gen Z Media. With over 200 twisty, cliffhanger-filled episodes, 6 Minutes tells the story of 11-year-old Holiday who is pulled from the icy waters with no memory of who she is or where she came from.
3 years ago, Brinley Pasternak helped the Anders family uncover the truth about Holiday's past. Now she'll need them to help her find the truth about hers. In 6 Minutes Out of Time, the long-awaited sequel, Cyrus Anders is found unconscious near the mysterious Elixir Academy in Florida, and Brinley learns the school may have a shocking connection to her missing mother.
Dive in now and get the most downloaded family audio adventure in history. Follow 6 Minutes wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen early and ad-free with the GZM family subscription.